Doug morning to you. Welcome to the good world. I am Seth. That's Charlie. There he is. Oh man, why are we not at the park yet? We just got in the car, and I don't want to wait. I just want to be there. Well, I hope you all had a lovely weekend. The original plan, oh no, this is hard to do while driving. Okay, I think we're okay. That was not the safest thing. I think I need to adjust my whatever holder dealy phone mount. But I can do that later. Don't need to do that while driving. So I had planned a special surprise that maybe wasn't that much of a surprise because I think I sort of mentioned it last week. It was going to drop today. It ended up not happening, so I'm going to put on my sunglasses because it is sunny this morning. I was going to have my dad on the show because now that he is vaccinated, he wanted to fly out from New York and visit us here in California, and he did. Let me get out of this person's way. Okay. He did, so he was here all weekend, and that was really nice. It was really nice to see him. It was the first time we had seen him in over a year because of the pandemic. He lives in New York. We're on the other side of the country, obviously. Oh my god. Let me just pull over here real quick so I can adjust this without killing myself or other people, because I value human life. Yeah. You love those sounds, right? That's, Susie, my wife, gets to hear me make all kinds of groans and grunts just as I go about my day. There's an entire section of the day that we just refer to as my morning groans. Oh my god, this thing. Why won't you just stay in one place? Alright, well, that's how we're going to do this for a while. Let's let this truck go first. I know, Charlie. Okay, now we can go. I know, I have my morning groans, you have your morning beeps. All kinds of morning sounds in the household. So my dad did in fact come out to visit, but we were not able to record an episode on Friday because I was having an issue with the microphones, and so you would not have been able to hear both of us. You would have had to hear one or the other of us, and so we didn't do it. I'm gonna have him on at some point, and we'll just do it over Skype, because the thing I wanted to talk to him about, which I will mention here, is some of the best advice he ever gave me. I've mentioned my sort of aristocratic upbringing before. My dad is he is now a senior tax partner at a major New York law firm and does a lot of, corporate law stuff, and so has been able to, fund a pretty good life for himself, and I have benefited immensely from that. But the best advice that he ever gave me, that I will talk with him about at some point, was when I was starting my first job out of college. I was going to go and work at an economic consulting firm, doing, data analyses in, it was mostly corporate litigations and also some healthcare research. And I was very concerned that, having just been hired, I feel like I may have said first job out of high school, and I meant to say out of college. So first job out of college. First sort of real adult job, and first corporate job. So I was concerned that basically I was going to get to this job and I was going to start working, and they were going to be like, well, hiring this guy was a huge mistake. We never should have done that. And I had some really serious imposter syndrome, which is extremely normal for a human being. And what he said to me was, by any reasonable definition, I've been pretty successful in my career. But every day I wake up in the morning and I get on the subway and I go to my office and I think to myself, today is the day that I will be revealed for the fraud that I am. And I found that extremely comforting. I mean, that in the context, he also said, they know what they're doing with hiring, and so they wouldn't have hired you if they didn't think you could do this, and they know that, you'll probably need training and things. Like, no one expects a new hire in a large corporate firm to be a superstar right out of the gate. But he said, the worst case scenario, it won't work out, but there's no reason to sort of go in assuming that. And it worked out pretty well. I was there for a couple of years, for 3 years, and I turned into a pretty decent analyst. And so that was fine. But that advice always kind of stuck with me, because in our society, we are really taught to ignore our imposter syndrome. Well, it's not just that we're taught to ignore it, because I think we teach it differently, not intentionally, but I think that generally, confident white men like me are taught to just sort of assume, no, you're right, ignore those doubts. Ignore the doubts in the back of your head and push on through, and you'll be fine. And people who aren't white men are generally taught to be really, really sure that they're right, because everyone is going to question them constantly. And again, none of this is intentional. It's just sort of a cultural thing that we've internalized from generations and generations of patriarchy. And it kind of does everyone wrong. It does us all dirty. I know, Charlie, we're on the way to the park, and you don't like it when I talk to screens. But you're okay. You're okay. I know we'll be at the park in 10 minutes or so. 10 minutes. That's Charlie language for minutes. So yeah, there's sort of this cultural thing where we all just, if you are a white man like me, you sort of internalize the idea that the doubts are, basically the devil on your shoulder, and you should ignore them completely. And what ends up happening pretty often is that when we don't acknowledge our imposter syndrome and don't acknowledge the part of our brain that is doubting what we're doing, we can end up being really, really wrong, and sometimes being really wrong in disastrous ways. And I've worked at this point for a few different sort of data and tech operations that were run by, really confident white dudes who just kind of insisted that they knew what they were doing, insisted that someone else would figure out the details, and made a lot of really big promises to bring in money that they didn't necessarily know how to back up. And in some cases, in multiple cases, backing up those promises has turned out to be impossible, certainly on the timeline that was promised. And that's kind of what happens when you ignore your imposter syndrome. It doesn't mean getting completely dragged down by it. But we are all of us are wired to be wrong. And our brains are wired to sort of jump to conclusions based on a very small amount of evidence. Because, if you're sort of wandering around in the savannah and you encounter one instance where it turns out the rustling in the leaves is a lion trying to hunt you, then, it's probably good to learn from that anytime there's a rustling in the leaves, you should get the hell out of there. And so we are not wired to go about things in a really scientific way. But all these thousands of years later, we do have that ability. And we have the ability to sort of recognize when we're wrong and to change our behavior. I recently read a book by, his last name is Deval, his first name is Frank, maybe? He's a Dutch primatologist. And the book is called Are We Smart Enough to Understand How Smart Animals Are? I think it's called that. It may be Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? It's either know or understand in that word slot, but the rest of the title is accurate. And I'll put a link, down there if you're interested. But he sort of talks about how there's a lot of research in animal intelligence that is not so much about assessing what certain animals can and can't do, but is about proving how special humans are. And that's kind of silly, because there's a lot that humans can do and there's a lot that humans can't do, right? Our superpower is not, we can't travel by echolocation like dolphins and bats can, where we sort of make a sound and figure out three-dimensional space around ourselves. But we have a lot of sort of ability to reason that other animals don't have. But the problem is the way that we use that ability is often not to actually reason, but to rationalize. We use our incredible intelligence to confirm the things we already believe to be true, because we are afraid of the idea that maybe we are wrong, and then we have to sort of think about how fallible we are, and when we think about how fallible we are, we have to maybe even start thinking about our own mortality and all of these big things that we really don't like thinking about. And so our brains, far more often, instead of reasoning, we rationalize. We get a feeling about what is true, and then we talk ourselves into thinking that it's true. And when we deal with our imposter syndrome by dismissing it and just trying to ignore it, then we lean very heavily into our rationalizing instinct, and we end up making a lot more mistakes. And so the thing about imposter syndrome is you shouldn't. You don't have to let it control you, but it's important to sort of listen to it and think through it and actually parse it, as opposed to just completely writing it off. And so that's an area where I think as a culture we have a lot of ground that we can cover and a lot of change that we can make. And so I also want to sort of talk about this idea of rationalizing in the context of talking about my dad's visit, because he was out here and I sent him the link to this channel. He had not seen any of it yet, and it just kind of worked out that the thing that auto-loaded when he opened it was the episode that I recorded on, I know, Charlie, I know. The episode that I recorded on Wednesday, where I sort of talked about inherited trauma, and I talked about the abusive and coercive behavior that I engaged in when I was younger, and that is still somewhat embedded into my brain, but I have mostly managed to overcome it, and I've gotten pretty good at thinking about how my actions will affect other people before I act. But he watched that episode, and he's so far the only person to see it, but I am sort of assuming and hoping that at some point someone will see this, and maybe you'll also have seen that one. And it's obviously a very heavy episode, and the topics are sort of a lot to navigate emotionally. But he kind of asked me, why. I mean, not critically, but I think he wanted to understand why I had chosen to sort of put all of that information about myself out there. And he said, I sort of assumed that talking about it publicly is part of your effort to work through it. And I do think that's true, and I think that's part of it. And I have, what I said to him is I've also just sort of worked through it a decent amount in therapy, and I've talked to Susie about it, and it's, this is far from the first time I've talked about it at this point. But it is a lot to talk about. But it is, as much as it being about me working through it, it's also about, for me, it is about sort of modeling cultural behavior. I think we have a tendency to demand accountability from other people, and it's much easier to demand something from someone else than it is to demonstrate it yourself. And I think if we really care about a world in which people are accountable for their actions, we need to show what that looks like. And so we have an entire culture built around bullshit and around sort of denying anything that could fit into our personal narrative that may reflect poorly on us, and around, or if not denying it, then rationalizing it. And that's sort of the connection to what I was just talking about, is our tendency to rationalize it. You see this a lot in what often gets talked about as rape culture, and I know that is a term that makes a lot of people defensive, because we really don't like to admit the things in our culture or in ourselves that are negative. And so, you get a lot of rationalization of, well, she was asking for it, they were both drunk, whatever, to sort of excuse bad behavior. And it's really hard because, you can't change past behavior, but you can address it honestly, or you can keep rationalizing it and denying it. And so what I was really trying to do with that episode, I don't think you should trust everything that I say, because there are going to be plenty of things that I say that are going to be incorrect, because I'm human and I'm doing the best I can, and I sort of hope that everyone else is going to do the best they can. But I want you to trust that I am not going to I'm not going to try to bullshit you. I'm not going to try to hide unflattering things about myself. I from the outset of this show, I know, Charlie, I know. From the outset of this show, I wanted to share some of the most unflattering is not necessarily the right word for it, because that makes it about me, and as I said the other day, I don't think those stories are really my stories. I think they are stories in which I'm the bad guy, and so they're really someone else's stories to tell about their experience with me. But they are, I'm not going to hide the things about me that are negative, because and that you may not like, and that I don't but that I've still had to sort of accept as part of my own story and my own history, because I don't want to bullshit you. I think I said in the first episode, I'm just completely tired of bullshit. I don't want to do it anymore, and there's far too much of it in our society, and far too much defensiveness, and far too much rationalization, and I want to show how we don't have to be trapped by that. So we're at the dog park. Charlie is very excited. We'll be back in a bit with continuing this conversation. Okay, talk to you in a bit. I know, peeps, I know. Hello, just a quick reminder that if you are enjoying this program, I would love for you to click the like button down here, or the subscribe button also down here. I don't know if I'm pointing exactly right, but it's like around here-ish. Please click that. Share this with your friends. Tell people. If you think what I have to say is at all useful or interesting, then yes, spread the word. And if you don't, then hide the word. And if you don't find it interesting, I don't know, tell me in the comments, tell me why, tell me what you think I'm doing wrong. And I may not agree with you, but I may. I'll certainly listen to you. And right now there are only like 7 subscribers, so you can definitely get yourself some attention by commenting, because there aren't not an overwhelming amount of dialogue at the moment. Okay, thank you. Bye. Okay, hi, picking back up. Here we go. Also, this is the, whoa, that's quite a sound. Oh, they're sawing some wood. This is the internet debut of, I'm very excited about this hat. I ordered it a few weeks ago and it arrived last week. This is the logo of the Sacramento Solons, who were a Pacific Coast League team in the 1930s, 40s, 20s, some early, a while ago. But I really enjoy, there just are not that many professional sports teams that have an adorable little heart logo. And so I figured I would, especially since, so Susie and I are moving down to Sacramento at some point in the next couple of months. And so I figured I would rep some Sacramento baseball history And, also it's my initial in a heart, and it's adorable. Anyway, so picking up, we were talking about bullshitting and sort of the tendency to try to hide the truths about ourselves that we would prefer to hide and keep hidden. Oh, sorry, Charlie, I did not have the window all the way open for you. And so, yeah, I think, part of what happens as a result of, partially it's the way that our justice system works, where everything is very punishment focused, and part of it is a cultural thing where we think that we can sort of control other people's bad behavior through punishment, as opposed to, I think the best way to encourage people to be better is to try to model what I think better looks like, and to try to talk about what I think better looks like, and to accept the fact that what any of us have done in the past is not necessarily going to be as good, because we are all so much the product of our environments and our genetics too, and we don't have control of either of those things. And so if you look at how much control a single individual has over their own behavior, it's honestly a pretty small amount. I think there are some questions that are still unanswered here, but I would say, like, my view is that we have some free will, but it's a lot less than we like to think we do, and it often requires a lot of energy to sort of overcome the much larger forces that we've inherited. And so the sort of culture of punishment and trying to coerce people into behaving the way that we want them to behave, and shaming people when they don't conform to even to things that are, sort of unambiguously good, right? Like, it's pretty unambiguously harmful to murder someone. It's pretty unambiguously good to help someone, and getting someone to help other people and to not murder other people through coercion is, like, not actually necessarily going to be an effective way to do it. Like, the reason not to murder someone isn't that you were coerced into being kind. It's to sort of accept the reality of all of this and decide for ourselves that we want a world where we're all just treating each other with the respect and dignity that human beings deserve. So I started to talk a little bit about what sort of makes us unique as humans, and I think, to me, the biggest thing is that we have the capacity, the different apes have, like, tree climbing superpowers that we don't have. Lots of birds can fly. All kinds of animals can do things we can't do. But I think we have the capacity to overcome our sort of evolutionary instincts towards defensiveness. But having that capacity doesn't mean we do it, and we often don't. And it's really hard to do it unless you have been shown that it's possible and been shown how to do it. And so that's part of what I'm trying to do here, is just show people that we don't have to be defensive about the things that we've done, even if those things are difficult and harmful and cruel. We can acknowledge the truth of the entire truth of what has brought us to this point, and make a decision to not be trapped by it, and make a decision to try to do something better. And so that's what I'm trying to do, and it's what I'm trying to encourage other people to do. The other thing I wanted to talk about that came up in just my conversations with my dad across the weekend. I told him about this sort of framework that I've been playing around with of the three dimensions of human experience are ridiculousness, wonder, and grief. And he asked me a very good question that remarkably had not occurred to me, which was, where does love fit into that? It's a very good question. But I think there are going to be plenty of things where I won't have an immediate answer. But for that question, actually, the answer immediately jumped into my mind, which is that love actually contains all three of those dimensions. Okay, I'm going to try to give you like a little bit of linear algebra really quickly, which, sorry. But, we understand the idea of like 2 dimensions or even 3 dimensions, right? 2 dimensions is just you can picture a line graph and like that's the axis for it. You can picture 3 dimensions and that's the axis for it. There's like height and length and depth. And in linear algebra, you can express any point on a 3-dimensional plane as a combination of the other 3 dimensions. And so love, if we take those dimensions of grief and wonder and ridiculousness, love takes strongly from all 3, right? If you love someone, then you appreciate sort of the beauty and the wonder in who they are and the uniqueness of who they are. And you also appreciate the ridiculous aspects of who they are. And you are, you're not necessarily grieving and feeling hurt throughout the course of your relationship with a person, but if you love someone, you are preparing yourself to eventually feel the grief of their loss, whether that's because the relationship ends or because something happens to them and you lose them. And so, yeah, I don't know that I'm going to have such an easy answer for everything, but I actually think love can be expressed as a combination of ridiculousness and wonder and grief. So that was my like very spontaneous and not, the whole framework is not, there are some things that I have thought through in great detail. That's not really one of them. That it's an idea that really just kind of popped into my head one day, but I like it, so I'm kind of running with it. And it's a working theory, and I'm sure it'll change over time. But yeah, I sort of like this idea of love as a linear combination of these other things. Trying to decide how much more I want to give you like linear algebra and probability theory here. But if you've ever heard of regression, or it's in the business world, it gets called regression analysis, but no one who actually does it calls it that when we talk to each other. But regression is just, it is using an existing set of dimensions to sort of make a best prediction estimate in another dimension. So I don't know what's the easiest example in my head is baseball. I'm a big baseball fan, and I honestly got into statistics. I'm wearing this baseball hat from this no longer existent baseball team from my soon-to-be adopted home. But I got into data analysis and statistics through baseball, and so I'm not gonna. If there are viewers who don't know the rules of baseball, then I guess let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll also do an explainer about baseball. But I'm going to assume you understand the basics of how baseball works. And so one really common way to use regression, and I apologize for sort of the arcane nature of this conversation, but it actually we'll get into this in future episodes. I actually think regression has there are a lot of ways that the concept is useful for thinking about other much bigger and more important concepts in our lives. So one very common way to use regression in baseball is to predict the number of runs you would expect a team to score based on there are 4 different kinds of hits in baseball. There are also walks. You can walk and go to first base. You can get a single, a double, a triple, or a home run. And it turns out that across the season, you can take the number of walks, singles, doubles, triples, and home runs that a team has compiled and get a very, very accurate estimate of the total number of runs they're going to score. And there's some room for error there, but it's a pretty good way to estimate it. And so it's been used to estimate the run value of, if a hitter hits a double, then that has a run value of, it's something like 1.3, or no, sorry, it's like 0.6. A home run is like 1.3 because you get the one run from the batter, and then, in expectation, on average, there are 0.3 additional runners on base. So if you sort of assume that a runner has no control over the situation when they're at bat, and that there are not going to be huge differences in what they can do when there are runners on base versus when there are not, which is a questionable assumption, but sort of running with that assumption, home run is worth something like 1.3 runs. It varies a little from season to season. But so when I talk about dimensions, there's this idea from statistics. You have singles is its own dimension, right? It's in your data set, it's a column, and that is one dimension. Singles is a dimension, doubles is a dimension. The number of singles that you hit is more or less independent of the number of doubles you hit. It's technically not true, because if you're hitting a single, you obviously can't also hit a double, but across a season, they're more or less independent pieces of information. Certainly for the purposes of this kind of exercise, they are. And so you can take the 5-dimensional space, which is a very high concept way of describing the fact that you have a data set that has the number of walks, the number of singles, the number of doubles, the number of triples, and the number of home runs. You can take those 5 dimensions and convert them into a rough estimate of the dimension of runs. So if you have the walks, singles, doubles, triples, homers, you can make a projection onto the space defined by runs. Sorry, that got like a little esoteric. It's sort of a hard thing to describe. It's a very hard thing to describe while driving without like a whiteboard to draw on. So maybe at some point I'll do a little more of that. But the basic concept in linear regression that I think is really applicable to the world is you take your in this case, your singles total gets multiplied by a constant, and every team, the constant is the same. And your doubles get, so a single, it's like 0.1 times singles plus 0.3 times doubles plus 0.9 times triples. These numbers are not exactly right. Plus 1.3 times home runs gets you expected runs scored. And so this concept of there's a coefficient that is sort of the, you can think of it as the machine where you're taking the inputs of all of these different kinds of hits, you're running them through the machine, and it's spitting out an answer. But there's also a really important part of regression, which is that there is the actual answer is that estimate plus a bunch of randomness, just a bunch of random noise that is unpredictable. And you can look at anything in the world and you can describe it as a bunch of inputs interacted with some set of coefficients that are sort of the numbers that determine how much your inputs matter, plus a bunch of randomness gives you the output. And so one of the oldest questions in the world is nature versus nurture. How much does nature matter? How much does nurture matter? And that is the equivalent of asking whether the number of home runs you hit matters more or the value of a home run matters more. The answer is both. They both matter. And you're going to get both of those things plus a bunch of random noise. And so all of our behavior is the interaction of our environment times our genetics, plus a bunch of random stuff. And so when we try to impose, I think we can talk about what is a good moral worldview without trying to coerce people into it, even if their worldview is obviously harmful. Because when you coerce someone into doing something, you are introducing an element of harm. And so it's a really complicated thing to sort of sit and think, coercing someone into being nice to other people, especially like at scale, ends up actually adding a lot of harm, because underneath there's going to be resentment, there's going to be probably a desire to rebel and to push back against that coercion, and you're going to end up generating a lot of sort of random, unpredictable messes that you couldn't have foreseen. And so what I'm trying to do is really live with sort of a total nonviolence, where I talk about my dream of what the world can be, but I don't try to force anyone into it, because I think, quite frankly, if you really understand, it's a hard thing to see, and I don't think I see the entire picture, but I have arrived at a perspective that honestly echoes a lot of very wise things that I've come across. And so I don't necessarily, I don't think that I am wise, but I think I have come to develop some perspective that gives me some understanding of the place of wisdom that some of these folks come from. And so there is an important difference between sort of sharing our worldview and sharing our dreams and trying to force other people to conform and comply. And so I'm not going to force anyone to do anything, but I'm going to talk about how I think we can be better to each other. And so that's what all of this is, and how we can take all of these sort of evolutionary situations, all of our built-in defensiveness, all of the things that have been conditioned into us either by millions of years of human evolution or by thousands, maybe tens of thousands of years of human society, and all of the pain and violence that people have dealt with for all of that time. We can take all of that, we can look at it, we can acknowledge it and acknowledge the impact it has on us, and we can decide to change things. We can decide, first and foremost, to change ourselves. And so that's where I'm starting from with all of this. And that's why, coming back to my dad's question of why I shared these really painful stories about myself, much painful for someone else than they are for me, right? They are the story of someone else's trauma that is also traumatic for me, having been really horrible to people I care about. That's traumatizing, if not as traumatizing. And again, like I'm not the victim, but it's not like I'm coming out of it thinking it was great. And so I am looking at the things that I've done and understanding their context, and I'm deciding to be better. And that's a thing that I think anyone can do. And it's really hard, and it is, as I have said before, it's much easier for me given the way that the world largely treats me with dignity and respect and sort of validates me, and doesn't have me constantly feeling like I need to fight for my life or my well-being. And so I want to encourage a world where we give everyone that amount of opportunity. But we do have to start with ourselves, and I think people who come from similar backgrounds as I have, who, we haven't inherited everything, but we've inherited more than other folks. We can look at the world and understand that there's plenty of resources for us to share, and we can make the decision to start building a world that is truly about equality and truly about empowerment. Because it would be a whole lot nicer to live in. A book I've been reading recently is The Four Agreements by, I believe his name is Don Miguel Ruiz. I'm assuming he pronounces it Ruiz, but it could be, or Ruiz. But my a big chunk of Susie's family has the same last name, and in California, for some reason, it's pronounced Reese. So maybe it's that. But he talks about this idea that all of us, we don't even realize it, but we're living in hell, because we are constantly feeling threatened. We are made to feel threatened and unsafe, and we have all of this anger that we've internalized as a result of it. And so we are living in a hell on earth that we don't even realize is a hell on earth, and we can turn it into a heaven on earth if we really decide to honestly, this is not his words, but to get over our bullshit, and to try to make something better, and to stop taking our pain out on each other. And that's a really hard thing to do, and the more pain you have, the harder it is to do. And so again, I understand that it's easier for me than it is for other people, but I still would encourage everyone to try and to sort of do our best to process our pain instead of taking it out on each other. because you can always come up with a reason to rationalize and to justify taking your anger out on someone else, and it always is going to do some harm, even if you convince yourself that it's not. The only way we can make all of this better is to stop taking things out on each other and to try to work towards something better. And that's the good world. That's the name of the show. Okay, just got home. As you can tell, Charlie's actually pretty chill. I sort of would expect him to be a lot more excited to get out of the car, but he's doing okay. But we're gonna go in. I'm gonna eat lunch. I'll be back for some meditation in a bit. Charlie won't, so say goodbye to Charlie. Goodbye to Charlie. Okay, bye. Please like and subscribe. 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 I am back at a lovely lunch. I also, since I took my hat off, have some, it's actually not that bad right now, but I had some pretty good hat hair. And this was like going up like this. Turns out a comb over would not be a good look on me. It's not really surprising. I don't know, comb overs are not that great a look on anyone. Also, why would I hide the way that I am? Yeah. That is, though, it's just like another level of bullshit, right? Like, we are those of us who experience male pattern baldness are supposed to hide it for, I don't know, to make people think that we look we have all of these like internalized ideas about other people based on their appearance, and I don't think any of us necessarily like mean to do that, and they're there, and I understand all of that, but it's all bullshit. So I would rather just ignore the bullshit. Plus, I mean, not for nothing, but these curls turn out to be pretty fun anyway. I kept my hair short for a really long time, and look what I was losing out on by trying to hide all of my baldness for business reasons. Yeah, we all just try to, like, everyone's always trying to dunk on each other, and we just all end up being assholes, and it's no good. It doesn't do a darn lick of good. Anyway, it's meditation time. I'm gonna do another 10-minute silent meditation. One of my happy, peaceful practices. I read a really nice thing last night. It was actually in the book I was mentioning earlier. It was in the Four Agreements. But there is a story from, I don't know if it's from the Buddha or just a Buddhist monastery. But there's a novice monk, and he is asking the master at the monastery, if I meditate for an hour every day, how long will it take for me to reach enlightenment? And the master says, if you meditate for an hour every day, I don't know, maybe 10 years. And the novice monk says, oh, okay. So if I meditate for 2 hours a day, then how long will it take me to reach enlightenment? And the master says, I don't know, maybe 20 years. And the novice says, wait a minute. If I meditate more per day, it will take me longer to reach enlightenment? I don't understand. And the master says, well, you need to, maybe in that time you will realize that it is a process of learning and discovering and finding happiness for yourself, and that meditation is not just the challenge of, it's not setting a goal and achieving it. It's a practice. It's a practice, and you go along with it. I'm obviously butchering the story at this point, but that's more or less it, and I feel like that more or less illustrates the point. Anyway, yeah, it's a lovely practice that obviously I've started to do. I would encourage you to join with me if you like. You are also welcome to skip this if you prefer, or if you are driving or working or doing something where you can't actually take 10 minutes to sit by yourself, then passing 10 minutes in silence is also okay. It's good to be comfortable being alone with our thoughts, coming back to some of the stuff I said earlier today, a whole lot of what we do is avoid our thoughts, and especially avoid the thoughts that we struggle with, and sort of the things that we feel are threatening to the idea of ourselves as a good person. And so being alone with your thoughts is okay, and the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with them, and the more you can see and really learn to experience who you yourself are. And figure out how to be sort of the best version of yourself. It's all I'm trying to do. It's all any of us can do. So here we go. It's going to be 10 minutes. I am... one of these days I should bring out one of my Thich Nhat Hanh books, and we can do one of those. But for now, we'll just stick with the usual one. I follow my breath all the way in. I follow my breath all the way out. 10 minutes of sitting. And I'll be here... All right, let's push this start button. We got a 15-second countdown. 12, 11, 10, 9. This is kind of creepy. I'll stop. See you in 10 minutes. That was nice. Whew. I got a little sleepy there. Maybe you did too. Yeah, I'm not been sleeping super well. But that's mostly I was taking some, prescription medications to help me sleep, and I'm trying to wean myself off of them and get back to just like over-the-counter stuff, and then ideally, away from any medication entirely. But the transition, the last couple days, I've like been waking up for a couple hours in the middle of the night. Last night I woke up at like 4, which is when I read a little more of the 4 agreements, which has been good and interesting. So that's okay. Whew, okay. Well, sorry, that was a much higher pitched noise than I expected. Yeah, that is everything for now. Also, I am super excited because later today I am getting my first dose of COVID vaccine. So your boy over here is going to be vaccinated in a month or so. Second shot in a month or so. Yeah, so that's going to be great. And I'm getting the vaccine right next to one of my. So the pharmacy is at Save Mart, which I've been to once or twice. But next door to the Save Mart is Ace Hardware, and I love Ace Hardware. I do. I love a hardware store. I love projects. I am going in there actually not to get anything for projects of my own, but I'm gonna pop in and get some potting soil so that Susie and I can plant some plants. And also I'm gonna get some buckets because Charlie really likes to drink from buckets, and so we're gonna start keeping like a couple of buckets outside that he can drink from when he's hanging out outside, because that's what makes my dog happy, and so he can have that. Thanks for being here. I will see you tomorrow. Bye.
And where you went it? Why you went it there?
I so snoozy. I don't like this game.